So the Overton window keeps shifting to the further and further to the left. But additionally, if you guys ever read *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, there's this thing called technology or technocrat. I can't remember what the name of it is. Technologist. The idea basically that anything that speeds up the speed, anything that speeds up the bandwidth of communication is good, and anything that increases technology is good. And so when you do that, that's when you come up with antibiotics, the transistor. That's when you come up with quantum mechanics. That's when you come up with flight travel, and all of these things eventually get us to a society that's close to Star Trek, which is the ultimate utopian society where I have a replicator that makes me food and a 3D printer that builds my house. We don't live there. And so because we don't live in that society, socialism and communism don't work currently because we have a finite number of resources. If we did not have a finite number of resources, then we could live in that type of society. So the Overton window just slowly shifts to the left over time. The idea of us debating about petroleum. Dude, you go back in the 1960s and say, we're going to get off petroleum. They would fucking laugh at you. But now we see these electric cars. Possibly. We could. It's at least a possibility, whereas before it wasn't, and the difference is technology. That's what we're talking about.
That's the Overton window. So, I like to argue that, we disagree on this, but I think that we can go back to the traditional values. That's just something that me and Zuby agrees with me on.
You need to buy an island. Go buy an island somewhere.
It's not even traditional. I just think that we can meld the two into something better. It's just evolution.
On an individual level, yes, you can. If you want to live a traditional lifestyle, you can. It's just when you're
in your household, you can.
Yes, but when you when you're talking to a large population, whatever, not really. No.
Here's my theory on this. Jesus said wisdom will be proven right by her children.
Her children.
Right?
So
all the loony stuff with trans, all of this stuff that we're seeing happen, we're doing 2 daddies and 2 moms. How's that going to play out? How are these kids going to grow up?
Sure.
Give it enough time, and I think we'll look back and be like, letting all these kids take these drugs to make them infertile. And I think people will come back around, and what they're going to see is they're going to see my kids, they're going to see other people's kids, and they're going to be freaking superhumans because they're going to know music theory, they're going to know how to read and write at a young age, they're going to be able to retain information, they're going to be solid, stable, functional humans. And I think we'll see a huge disparity, and it'll either cause the collapse of society as we know it, or there'll be a clear delineation.
It might not even take 15 years.
From traditional families.
A great example of that would be like sort of the exceptionally progressive liberal beliefs in the Soviet Union up until 1991. In 1986, when Chernobyl happened, it bankrupted the entire country, and then they were forced to deal with the reality of the situation, and then you had a societal collapse like what you were talking about before. That could happen. The problem is this: as long as there's enough people in power to then say, well, the fact that your son knows how to play the guitar and he plays outside linebacker, that's because he's toxically masculine.
He's privileged.
Yep. By the way, toxically masculine, for those of you who don't know, that word actually comes from there were sociologists that were looking at violent prisoners, and the violent prisoner, you step on a shoe and now he wants to kill you. They were saying when these guys would get into escalated physical confrontations, they would literally murder people. And so the term was toxic masculinity. But then regular people, academics started using the word. That is not what the fucking word means. Like the word has been so bastardized. That is not where it comes from. Toxic masculinity is Ted Bundy. That is toxic masculinity. That's not what we're talking about here. So the thing is just been exceptionally overblown. Go ahead.
So when we talk about traditional family, traditional values, etc., would you find validity in equating that to the biblical family? And if not, then are we ascribing the families of, I guess, 60s to the 80s as the peak of marital values?
I mean, wouldn't the 50s be then? The 60s, you have a birth control pill, and you have,
For sure. Yeah, go back as far as are we subscribing the peak of humanity to be this period of time, or because where is the foundation of the values actually coming from? Because if that's the case, then we're also ascribing it to whatever doctrine they were living by.
Yeah, so that makes it confusing, because traditional values, you can't say that Christianity has a monopoly on that, right? There's traditional values in Islam and traditional values in Buddhism too. Yeah, it's tough to say, man. I don't know. Like, I deal with the world the way it is. I don't deal with the way the world should, because I study evolutionary psychology. What I just know is that I've never seen a period in time where things swung to the right. I just don't see it. What I see is politicians swing to the right, and I see individuals go against the grain and start raising their children, taking them to church, having exceptional, like, hey, what was it? A hockey player said, I'm not going to wear the gay pride uniform, stuff like that. You're going to see individuals do that, but over the spans of like population wide, I do believe things I just haven't seen an example where things shifted to the right. I haven't. You know, it's not like what's it called, the Handmaid's Tale, where the whole country becomes exceptionally conservative. That
For sure.
doesn't. I've never seen that happen.
Because
no, what example? I'm sorry.
I'm just thinking
19
like
I'm sorry.
in 50 years, will they call us traditional?
Yes.
Yeah.
The
That's
thing
what
is,
I'm trying to say.
I do.
Like, so how are we ascribing
Isn't it
traditional
crazy?
values to the peak?
Well, I promise
of
you.
the 50s?
I promise you, the Romans thought that the Egyptians were like, God, you
For
probably do
sure.
some bumpkin
Yeah.
crazy shit. What are you doing?
So,
It's great.
so what
Of course.
foundation would you ascribe as
Whatever
the
is
ideal
present.
one?
I have this.
It's
I have
like-
the.
Whatever's present.
I have the
really?
same.
Yeah, it's changing.
So
I have
you-
the
so
same
you-
question
so
you
you
do.
like the state of where we're
No,
at?
no, I'm saying what will it be in the future? I'm like, it'll be whatever is present
what it
then.
evolves to,
So
kind of?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like it just keeps changing.
The only example where I can think of a society going back to traditional values in modern times was 1979 overthrow of the
Yeah.
Iranian government. That is the only
That's
time
the only-
where, like,
For sure.
basically
Yeah.
they instituted Sharia law. That was the only. Maybe you could say the same thing happened in Afghanistan, like after the 1980s. But like similar to that, those are the only examples I can think of where you had a government enforced like movement back to the right. For the most part, that doesn't happen, and those societies tend to not be quite as stable because you're forcing people to do things that they don't want. The problem is
now,
it is
too.
it is the tree of knowledge, right? It's the
For
tree
sure.
of knowledge. It's the knowledge that is causing this. It is the fact that you're dating Steve, but you see Dan on social media
Yeah.
and he is taller and has a nicer car. It is literally the knowledge that causes everything to move in that
Temptation,
direction.
yes.
That causes
I
temptation.
actually truly
Yeah.
believe that that story, the whole point of that story in my eyes, because I don't ever
Which
like
one?
to see the stories in the Bible as
Adam and
actual
Eve.
literal.
Oh,
I like
got
to
it,
see
got
them as like this is an allegory. There's a point to this story to teach me something, and I truly believe that the whole point of that story is to teach that if women fall to temptation, we fall out of a discord with nature. And I totally think that that's true. If women fall to temptation,
Haven't people
look what
made the
happens. If
other
women
argument?
give out the sex when they're the gatekeepers of sex,
I don't
it starts a hedonistic cycle. It causes a cycle for everything to fuck up.
Let me ask you a question. I'm curious what your thoughts on this. The Jesus Revolution. You remember this from the late '60s, the early '70s?
Maybe
Rock stars.
Yeah, I do.
Huh?
Christ became rock
Jesus
star.
Christ rock
Yeah.
star, like
No, no, no,
Jesus
no,
Christ
no, no,
superstar.
no,
No,
no, no.
what are we talking about?
After the sex revolution and
Okay.
the free love movement,
Okay.
there was a huge
Oh,
revival.
you're talking about Jimmy Stewart. You're talking about that kind of thing.
No, I'm talking about Lonnie Frisbee. I'm talking about Calvary Chapel. I'm talking
Okay.
about Chuck Smith. Massive Southern California revival where all
Yeah,
these
didn't the
hippies. There's a movie coming
Yeah,
out.
I'm
There's
not-
a movie
I'm
The
not
coming out
aware.
this month.
Salvation Army thing, isn't that a part
No,
of
no,
it?
no,
The
no.
art piece.
I'm from the land of Joel Osteen and First Baptist
Gotcha.
Church. Right?
Oh,
So for me, it's
God.
just mega churches.
So in Southern California,
Yeah.
there was a massive revival.
Remember Robert Tilton? Right back on
No!
channel.
Wow.
Remember Robert
That's a
Tilton back on
trigger
channel
word.
21 in the middle of the night?
Yeah, middle
So
of the
there's a-
night.
there's a-
the
there's a-
later you stay up, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
So there's a movie.
Creflo Dollar.
There's a movie coming out this year, this February, called Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
And it's about the story of Calvary Chapel, Lonnie Frisbee, the wildest time where you're talking about body counts and women sleeping around, men sleeping around, and out of this comes this hippie Jesus movement where all
it
of
was
these people get radically saved and become more conservative.
Mm.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, then they have families and values, and you. I mean, you could argue that after the '70s, you have Ronald Reagan and a more
course.
conservative,
Yes.
America first, that type of thing. So I'm saying it's possible. I don't think it's possible without a supernatural revival like that.
Well, the thing is,
That's why I was asking what is the actual foundation for what you define as traditional.
I'm just as confused as you are.
Because I can ascribe it to when we talk about traditional values, I believe by and large, generally,
Mhm.
they align with biblical principles in what a marriage looks like. And so,
well, you could say traditional values in a lot of things, but in a marriage
sure.
specifically, you were talking about the
For
Bible.
sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I can see that. I think in the 1950s, we were traditionally conservative, and same thing in the 1980s. But I think in both cases, we had Russia to contend with, and they were exceptionally what we would consider to be politically liberal and jingoism, meaning America first. I think those things caused us to believe the way that we believed, and we don't see that way now. We laugh at Russia now. They tried to invade Ukraine. It's like University of Louisiana Monroe, like not being able to beat Alabama. How have you not taken Kiev yet, dude? Like we don't see them as a threat anymore. We're not racing them to the moon anymore. And so because of that, we don't have a mathematically literate populace, and we don't have a politically conservative voting group. I think that's essentially what's going on. We don't see an enemy we're afraid of.